Hello and welcome to Follow the Money. I'm Robert Tan. Join us as we explore the tools and insights you need to jumpstart your financial journey. Today's world feels louder than ever. Wars, trade wars, tech bans, alliances, sanctions. But here's the truth. The most powerful changes in your life don't make headlines. They show up in the grocery bill, your electricity rates, and your job prospects. And today we're joined by someone who sees the big picture clearly, Matteo Piasentini, a geopolitical analyst, international law expert, and senior lecturer at UP Diliman. Together we'll unpack how the world's quiet shift shaped the Filipino economy, our decisions, and our future. This isn't about politics, it's about power, patterns, and preparing ourselves to think smarter. Welcome to the show, Matteo. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, to start off, as a geopolitical analyst, Matteo, what major global shifts in 2025 should Filipinos be paying attention to, even if they're not making the headlines?
Right, good questions. I would say number one is the continuation of AI. AI is taking over our lives, and I think in the Philippines will be very relevant. It will affect BPO's industries and so on. So that's for sure a trend that we should follow. The second is actually climate disasters. I think they're affecting our lives, and they are not given as much space as we would need, we want to, in public debates. But of course, we should also take into account that in our future lives. And of course, other than trade wars, there are many shifts in global politics that perhaps go underway. We are seeing wars spreading over the continent and beyond, in Europe as well. And we always, here in the Philippines, people tend to think that those far wars don't affect us, but they actually do. Mm-hmm. So these are trends that maybe don't always make the headlines, but we should pay attention to moving forward.
Now, you've studied foreign policy and defense frameworks across ASEAN. Now, what role does the Philippines now play in the Indo-Pacific strategy of major powers like US and China?
Right, so the Philippines has somewhat returned to be relevant for US grand strategy for what we call the Indo-Pacific. Right, the Philippines is located in what they call the first island chain, which is this chain of islands that stretches from Japan to the north down to Mindanao and over, aimed at containing whatever Eurasian power wants to have the idea of expanding in the Pacific. So in that sense, the Philippines is seen as critical for these kind of strategies. Also, I would say the Philippines is seen as critical for Japan and Australia as a hub, right, the logistic hub for those purposes. When it comes to China, of course, it's no mystery that China aims at controlling long-term the South China Sea. Therefore, the Philippines is crucial, and managing their relationship with the Philippines would be crucial for actually ensuring control of those waters. But of course, this is just part of the story and disregards what the Philippines has to say about it, right?
Now, having said that, Matteo, how do you things like military agreements, for example, the EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the US, or trade alignments like RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, shape the Philippines' long-term economic trajectory? Now, are we leveraging these deals strategically or just reacting to bigger power moves?
Right. So my vision is that international politics, of course, is orchestrated, right, by great powers. But this doesn't mean that states like the Philippines that, you know, I find it quite derogatory, they're called like secondary states, less powerful states. But let's say sizable states with capabilities, right, they also have a say. And this is the way I see and I frame EDCA. If you think about it, EDCA came to be now like 12 years ago, and there's a big agency of the Filipinos, like it was Benigno Aquino, right, who actually reached out to the US and negotiated this agreement that doesn't really have this nature of like, we're granting you territory, right? They're just granting access to US troops, and it's negotiated, right? So, of course, there is an underlying interest of the Philippines, which is like, okay, we may have been face like threats that were not equipped to respond. Now we need to respond, we need to do it fast, and we need partners. And of course, we have a great partner, which is the US, that has military might, but we're also going to do that at our own terms, and not like the US-based agreement of 1947, for example. So in that sense, I see the value in that, and I see how the Philippines could actually have some leverage in EDCA.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to ask that the Philippines being in a very strategic location in Asia, how can actually the Philippines leverage on that with all these deals that are happening around, like the tariffs, trade agreements, exports and imports?
That's actually crucial, and I think you mentioned like diplomacy and how can the Philippines be smart in conducting its diplomacy with not only great powers, but I would also say like other powers from the region, like Japan, Korea, Australia, India, right? Our president is now in India, right? But also European states, Germany, UK, France, Italy in limited part. What is the interest, right? Yeah, the Philippines is strategic, but at the same time, the Philippines can also leverage the fact that not only you need to beef up your defenses to weather what may come, but also strengthen your economic resilience. And what the Philippines diplomats should do is to keep on linking these two issues, which are not really, capable states tend to keep them separate, and perhaps with a bit of disappointment, we've seen that in the latest visit of Bongbong Marcos to Trump, right? Trump didn't really give any ally discount to the Philippines, but granted that they will keep on collaborating militarily. The thing is, for the US, it's easy to keep economics and security separated. But for a developing country like the Philippines, with great potential, but also great challenges, that threshold, that boundary is very much blurred. Right? So I think successful engagement on both sides goes when economic resilience goes hand in hand with security.
Now, Matteo, you often write about unilateralism and regional blocs in this era of fragmented alliances. Can small countries like the Philippines still create economic leverage through smart diplomacy?
Right, yeah, we've seen that with the trilateral between the Philippines, Japan, and the United States. The trilateral interaction started like a year before the formalization of the agreement in April 2024. And throughout the whole 2023, the parties just talked about maritime security, military collaboration, and the like. But then, and I contend that this is an evidence of Philippine diplomacy, right? The agreement is all about connectivity infrastructure, the Luzon economic corridor, trilateral cooperation on trade and industry. And I think the message was clear, right? And I'm glad that it passed through, this kind of alliances or alignments like the one between the Philippines and Japan, that the Philippines has a stake in security, but also they need the Philippines. And in order to get that, that's not for free anymore. At least we need to collaborate on the base of strengthening also the country's economic resilience and capabilities, and being connected even more with trade routes and so on and so on. Let's see if this will turn into action. But
now, how much of that do you think is actually helping boost the economy?
Right, that remains to be seen, because these are recent developments, and of course, diplomacy in that sense goes with promises and pledges. For sure, it is a positive sign, right, to the fact that the Philippines has started many administrations ago in trying to develop its infrastructure, which is considered like critical for developing country. And these are signs of the interest that persists throughout administrations, right? No matter how polarized they are, how different they are, they have an eye on this, right? So probably this, in the long run, will be beneficial.
Now, we also often talk about security and economy separately, but how are defense cooperation, like what we mentioned, the EDCA, arms trade, and military presence quietly influencing our economic landscape?
Right, that's a quite tricky question because, well, first of all, having your or like having military cooperation agreements and so on should ensure stability, right? So that's for sure has an effect on what we call like investors' confidence, right? You're protected, therefore you're stable. So probably that's an immediate effect. Then another interesting aspect that I've been observing is, especially when it comes to Philippines-US relations, there's a marked attention on critical minerals. So the fact that for security purposes, right, collaboration is also expanding in other domains like resource extraction and so on, that may have an impact in Philippine economy that actually is eager to attract investments for this kind of industries, right, critical minerals and so on and so on. Then lastly, but this is more something that is being designed right now, is the joint development of certain technologies. Of course, not as advanced as joint partnerships with countries like Australia or Japan, but the fact that there is an attention on what the Philippines can offer and what the Philippines can receive in terms of like advanced know-how for unmanned systems and so on and so on. I think that's very important, and probably it will have a positive effect, but this remains to be seen.
Now, for example, in the South China Sea situation, beyond sovereignty, how do these tensions affect our trade routes, energy access, or investor confidence?
Right. So let's start with energy resources, right? The fact is, letting a foreign power fully control access to those resources will probably mean more negotiations from the Philippines. And on the Philippine side, there's a full interest in maintaining the current rules-based order that grants access to states to their own continental shelf, where these resources lay in the seabed and subsoil of the sea. In that sense, I feel that the Philippines is moving in the right direction by trying to enact maritime laws and maritime zone laws on that. So that's for sure, the stake that you have when it comes to energy. When it comes to trade route, the same reasoning is applicable. If you actually keep the status quo, there's freedom of movement in the sea, freedom of navigation, and so on and so on. So it's not a problem, right? But should foreign powers control access to the area, that access, it means for the Philippines that it will have to negotiate the conditions for such access. And this is simply against what is the national interest of this country.
All right, Matteo, we've followed the global money trail from defense deals to trade corridors, but how does this all translate to daily life? After the break, we'll bring it home and ask what these global shifts mean for Filipino investors, business owners, and ordinary citizens trying to get ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to Follow the Money. We're still with Matteo Piasentini, geopolitical analyst, international law expert, and senior lecturer at UP Diliman. Before the break, we explored how global forces are shaping the Philippines' position on the world stage. Now let's bring it closer to home and see how everyday Filipinos and new investors can make sense of all this and start making smarter moves in an unpredictable world. Now, Matteo, let's start with this. Given your experience in international law and export controls, what blind spots do you think Philippine leaders and businesses still have when it comes to navigating global rules and agreements?
Right. I think that's a crucial question. There's a lot of debate going on here about the potential for Philippine exports, right? But so far, what the country has exported is mainly workforce through remittances, and this industry has vulnerabilities, especially connected with shifting values of currencies and so on, and also the fact that it doesn't really fuel domestic manufacture and create jobs domestically. Now, a very important aspect that is usually overlooked when it comes to navigating this environment of tariffs and deterioration of trade is that the Philippines is considered, for example, by the European Union as a country that can still enjoy the generalized system of preferences, meaning that there's a tariff decrease or almost to zero for certain commodities for Philippine exports should the Philippines wants to coordinate, the Philippine government, decision makers want to coordinate, strengthen trade relations with the EU bloc. And that could be a source of alternative exports than the United States, that of course is not a predictable or reliant market anymore, right? So I think this is an aspect of, or an angle of European-Philippine relations that should be much more explored in that sense.
Having said that, are you saying that right now all eyes are just too focused on U.S. tariffs instead of looking at other locations, like you said, the EU, and also increasing or strengthening trade ties here in the ASEAN?
Right.
Now, what should the next step be in terms of focus?
Well, of course, like the Trump tariffs make the headlines, right? But the Philippines actually, in the latest years, actually has moved towards like partner diversification. And these partnerships that the Philippines is forging, not within ASEAN, but also like with other regional countries and far to the EU actually is, again, merging security and trade and economics, right? So I think the Philippines should double down on that direction while keep their relationship with the U.S. as manageable as possible, right? So in that sense, I fully agree with you that this is something that the Philippines should even accelerate in the future, and probably this is something that also the Filipino public should start demanding from its leader more and more. That's a very important aspect. When it comes to ASEAN and probably RCEP, which is the next big thing, right? The biggest trade agreement in region, I think, of course, there's a potential for that. But just the Philippines and especially Filipino public should be aware that RCEP forces states to reduce tariffs after 10 years or some years after the entering into force of the agreement. But that should be balanced also on an assessment of what the industry domestically looks like, right? Because the effect of pure regional competition to certain industries in the Philippines will be disruptive. And what the public should also demand is like counterbalancing measures, to support these industries to remain competitive.
Because it's going to be different in different industries.
Exactly. I think we should have a much more open debate on what lays ahead, and these developments will happen like in 5 to 10 years' time. So it will affect our lives entirely.
Like where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, and focus on that.
Exactly, a full assessment, right? On what does the Philippines gain from RCEP and what does the Philippines loses from RCEP, right? Which is something that
has to be balanced.
Right. It's full, of course. These big trade agreements have a lot of potential, but at the same time there are dangers and there are disruptions brought by full liberalization, homogenization of rules of origins and the like.
And sometimes it takes a long time as well.
Absolutely, to see the effects.
Now, Matteo, you've studied both European and ASEAN systems. What lessons from Europe's approach to regional cooperation can we adapt here in Southeast Asia, especially for long-term economic resilience?
Well, first of all, I firmly believe that the destiny of each country is entirely owned by these countries. So, let's take these lessons with a pinch of salt, right? Europe mostly has learned from its own mistakes. So, I'm not sure if the model is fully replicable here. And I have full respect on the fact that ASEAN states are very jealous of their sovereignty, because for them it has been a hard-earned prize after decolonization. So
but let's say if you look at it on a business standpoint, when you look at best practices, what kind of can we learn in terms of best practices being done in the EU?
Right. Let me circle back to trade blocks, right? A thing that the EU does is, the EU is a big market, right? And every state doesn't have trade barriers, right? But the EU has cohesion funds, meaning that versus like this trade liberalization, there are funds for areas that were the losers of these trade liberalization that promote local development. I don't see this mechanism being applied in ASEAN. And I think it has something to do with the distributional issues that we have in ASEAN, right? There are, of course, winners of economic cooperation and trade, but also many losers, right?
Of course.
And I think a coordinated ASEAN response when it comes to, areas that are being impoverished by economic competition and promoted trade should help strengthening social and political cohesion within the bloc.
Now, looking at it on a microscope with your students in your lectures, how do you help now your students connect abstract international relation theories to real-world issues like inflation, job markets, or tech bans?
Well, students are very brilliant. So, of course, it's not really a challenge in that sense. Of course, sometimes concepts can be quite confusing. And so I already know how that concept may explain certain parts of their life, right? So in that sense, I either ask them, well, you give me an example of this, how do you think it fits real world issues? Or some other times I try to guide the conversation towards these kind of themes, and sooner or later a question on the topic I want to deal with
like
comes
that,
out.
How do you impart critical thinking on their part on what's happening not only locally but also looking at what's happening globally that affects us here in the Philippines?
Right. There's a tendency to think of your own country in special terms, and I think it's beautiful also. But me coming from a different country, I also try to show that many trends and many phenomena are the same. They just have different manifestation in different countries, right? And so I think this is an aspect that promotes critical thinking in terms of like, okay, we have the same issues, the same problems, therefore we can also find and learn from each other and find common solutions.
And now with so much noise on social media and news, what simple mindset or filter can help Filipinos distinguish real economic trends from hype?
Well, I think the rule of thumb is to see if there are recurring themes over the years. Right? So I think it's goes through like an attentive reading of news and being exposed, of course, to different kinds of news outlets, and of course TV shows like this one. Right? If a theme recurs, it means that there's probably something going on there, and that guides my understanding of what is the interest, right? We mentioned like critical minerals, for example. I mentioned that because it is a recurring theme, right, that affects Philippines-U.S. relations economically, though it doesn't really make the headlines, and it's not really much a hype topic, right? But I think it's going to be very relevant in the future.
And Matteo, in these uncertain and fast-changing times, how can the average Filipino or a first-time investor learn to follow the money? Are there patterns, habits, or signals you recommend people pay attention to in order to make smarter financial or economic decisions?
Right. Well, all the above, I would say. But also, as we said, like for sure, technological developments will affect our lives, daily lives, and many aspects even of interstate relations. So should someone be interested in the geopolitics of it? But also something that is maybe sometimes overlooked is demographics. Demographics change societal habits, people habits, economic spending, and so on and so on. So demographics is something that should be always monitored. And third, probably local development. Like what communities are developing more, where they are, what is the industry that is actually leading the development of a specific community, right? So instead of looking just at the country as a whole, but also the regions of the country and the variations, right? And the variations in terms of industries, I think it's quite interesting.
Okay, now Matteo, we'll go to our rapid fire questions.
Wow.
You just have to answer yes or no. You don't have to explain your answer. Let's start with this. If you follow the money, will it eventually lead you to a coffee shop in Makati?
Yes.
Can a president's tweet crash your stock portfolio?
Yes.
If economics were a telenovela, would you watch it?
Nah.
No. Is geopolitics just a fancy way to say who's fighting over what?
Yes, I would say.
Okay. Should your Barkada chat group talk more about rates than relationships?
No.
And finally, complete the sentence. Money is the root of all.
Money is the root of all? That's challenging. I would say issues.
Issues?
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, sometimes it does create issues in life, but it's a good answer.
Even
Thank you.
rich people have problems, so
Rich people problems, right?
Yeah.
But you got to follow the money.
exactly.
Okay, thank you, Matteo, for joining us and for the eye-opening insights. The world is changing fast, and understanding it is no longer a luxury, but a necessity. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And in today's interconnected world, trade isn't just about goods and services. It can signal cooperation or conflict. As Warren Buffett once warned, balanced trade is good for the world, but trade can be an act of war. In a world where military deals, trade blocs, and geopolitical shifts quietly shape our future, being economically smart means connecting the dots. Whether it's rising tensions in the South China Sea or new agreements like RCEP, these forces move money and impact your life. I'm Robert Tan. Stay curious, stay sharp, and always follow the money.